Melissa Hagee and Matt Hagee, the consultants from HC Cola, to make a presentation, and we'll proceed after that.
So you can use the microphone.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Melissa Hagee. For those of you who haven't been introduced to me yet, I think most of you have been to the meetings. I recognize many of the faces. My company is MHCP Collab, myself, my husband Matthew Hagee, and joining us, you can see on the screen, is our design experts, MKSK, Matt, Amanda, and Brenda. They're both on the call, and the purpose of this meeting is to really get into the details of the visioning plan update. So if you participated in the visioning session a couple weeks ago, we had developed 7 different themes. The plan is going to be organized around these themes. These are things that came out of the conversations that we had with the community, at these meetings, with the committee, and we've developed a set of comments and discussion points for each theme. So really the purpose of this meeting is to get input from the committee on each of the themes and the discussion points that are on the screen. So, sorry, I stand up. These are the 7 themes. Capitalizing on market opportunities with a mix of uses. So this was based on the market study that was done a couple of years ago, which said there was opportunities from our mixed use, for residential, in close proximity to transit stations. The second one is to develop a clear framework for development, kind of being very clear about what it is that we want to have and develop so that when people come in, they understand what it is that the community expects. The third is about architecture and having really good quality architecture, not specifically of a style, and how do you set standards and criteria for that so that you're getting something of value and quality that's reflective of Pinecrest. The fourth is the public realm around the transit stations. So we have stations that are planned, that are in the process of being built.
Right.
On the other side of the street, on Miami-Dade County, at 104th, at 136th Street, and we're also looking at the area around Dadeland Station, north and south. The fifth is ensuring a transition and really a buffer between the existing residential and anything that's commercial that abuts it, and that's really important because we want to make sure that whatever is built is in consideration of what's existing and what's there, and it's not going to have a negative impact on that community.
Right, that's understood.
The
Okay,
sixth
is
branding and defining a character for the overall corridor. So these are recommendations for the overall corridor and how to continue to enhance it. And the last one is connectivity and looking at street heart, different types of streets, bicycle and pedestrian connections. And for those of you who might not be familiar with why we're doing this project, a lot of it has to do with the fact that the county is creating these rapid transit zones in consideration of a comprehensive plan for the entire county of their SMART plan. So it's 6 different corridors and then a set of smaller connections, bus rapid transit, bus express rapid transit, and different kinds of premium transit. And they would like to see around each of the planned stations more intense zoning. So the village is preparing their own plan to present to the county to say this is what we would like to see, and it's within some of the parameters that they've set, including the development intensity. So with that, I just want to go through in more of an informal way this time and have discussion with the committee.
And I've just been informed by the village manager who's spoken with the village attorney that there can be discussion. There just cannot be any formal action, but there can be discussion amongst yourselves.
Okay. So The first thing is, yeah.
Just a point of clarification. Stephanie, so we're not calling the committee into order. We're just going to have conversation, and we're not going to approve the minutes. We're not going to do the national pledge of allegiance, any of that part.
Well,
I'm not quite sure how it works when you have no.
we could
quorum.
certainly do a roll call if you'd want. That's the first item on the agenda. We would not approve the minutes. Then, and we could do a pledge of allegiance.
Pledge of allegiance.
Sure. So, all right. I'm sorry. Then we'll do a roll call. Mr. Medina.
Here.
Mr. Farrar.
Here.
Mr. Kulig. Here. Mr. Sawney is absent. Mr. Casanova is absent. Mr. Matu is absent. Ms. Vice Chair Trucco is absent. So we'll do a pledge.
Pledge of allegiance. Been prepared. Pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Now we can start this.
Thank you.
Can I just take one of these?
You guys on?
There's a
Okay.
Easy.
There's another one.
Here, I'll give you this one.
I think this works.
We'll pass around again.
Can, okay, yeah, it works. Okay, so the first theme that we're looking for input on is about the market opportunities and the mixed uses. And what I have up here is just a summary on the right from the market study, which identified these opportunities for filling the gaps. So specifically that you have the high incomes, but the money is being spent outside of Pinecrest, and there's definitely an opportunity and a gap and a need for restaurants, retail, and even some kind of a central shopping area. So given that, and given that analysis that was done, we wanted to have a discussion about what's the right mix of uses. So initially, we're saying there should be an increase in the residential percentage from the current maximum 25%. So right now, the way the code is written, in the North Pinecrest Business Alternative District, which is, I have this zoning map as a reference, but right now there's 3, and we're looking at expanding it to 104th Street. So there'd be one overlay at 104th, and there would be one overlay at 136th. So right now, you can only do 25% residential, and it's limited to the 3rd and the 4th floor.
We don't have an extra one with us, but you should have one here.
And so the discussion would be, should we increase it beyond 25%? And should we consider creating a minimum residential instead of mixed-use buildings of 25%? So we want to just allow mixed use. Do we want to have a minimum amount of residential? Do we want to have a maximum amount of residential? We want to encourage a mix of unit sizes so that you're accommodating different household sizes, families, couples, individuals. And in addition, parking. So we want to also have something in there when we talk about uses that surface parking wouldn't be permitted as a primary use. So let's just have a conversation about that.
Okay.
Uses.
If I could make some brief comments before we get into that discussion. From a staff perspective, our recommendation would be to allow mixed-use development in the Pinecrest Business Alternative Districts. It's already permitted in the districts adjacent to Captain's Tavern, adjacent to the to Metrorail and the area Gator Dadeland Plaza. Those are the 3 North Pinecrest Business Alternative Districts where mixed use is already permitted. And I think staff would encourage that we also allow mixed use development adjacent to 104th where there's going to be a transit station, and 136 where there's going to be a transit station. And then in terms of the current code that allows 25%, I mean, it is primarily a commercial district, the corridor is, and I think we have to be careful in encouraging too much residential development along the corridor. I think mixed use makes sense, particularly in those districts, but to turn it into a residential corridor is going to allow for a lot of residential development for which we don't necessarily have available and adequate services.
Right, so this conversation, right? So I'm going to handle it as from my end, as a conversation, and I don't think that in the discussion it's just limited to these, to discussing this from the standpoint of percentages. Right, because percentages confuses a lot of people, and it could be very overbroad, very non-specific, and it causes a lot of angst and nervousness. So I might, kind of like if Ronnie were here, I would like brick and mortar type of conversation if we can.
Excuse me, could you use the microphone so we can hear you? Thank you.
Why don't you guys come over here and sit with us?
Thank you.
Sit with us. You're more than welcome. From my end of it, you can sit right up here and you can see what we're looking at and talking about. No, I'm just letting the group know that you can come closer if you'd like to, because I got some documents open. So my comment is that I understand percentages, and I think percentages are oftentimes a little too vague. All right, so I want brick and mortar type conversation, because percentages sort of confuse us sometimes.
Why can't you use the mic?
I am?
Bring that.
I am? Oh, I have to get closer?
Bring it closer.
Yeah.
Maybe a little bit more closer.
Because I'm comfortable like this, that's why.
Just bring that microphone closer to you, you'll be okay.
I like it like that. There you go.
There you go.
Yeah, but I'll accommodate you. You gotta get bigger, taller tails so I can cross my legs under the...
Yeah.
So what I was saying earlier, okay. So what I was saying earlier, that percentages are oftentimes overbroad, and they caused angst because not everybody understands the pie chart. And so I want to kind of get to the brick and mortar of things. Okay. And with that, I intended to show you some images, but I'm not, and I'm going to go to the things that I think that somewhat matter to me as a resident and as an architect. All right. One of the things that I did, and I've spoken to you about it, is I took all the codes of communities similar to ours, or that I saw that are kind of, there's a relationship that I could understand and that I've worked in. And one of the things that I tried to do is I tried to study the R code for Pinecrest first. And I looked at the Pinecrest code, and I looked at the FAR, and I looked at the height restrictions, and then I kind of compared that, pretty much those two units to so I looked at Pinecrest, City of Miami, Miami-Dade, Miami Beach, Coral Gables, Pembroke Pines, West Palm Beach, and Boca Raton. And what I did is I took each one of those codes. Right? I'll repeat it. I'll repeat it if you didn't hear it. I took Pinecrest, City of Miami, Miami-Dade, Miami Beach, Coral Gables, Pembroke Pines, West Palm Beach, Boca Raton. And because I wanted to, and because I thought that there was a relationship in scale and size and intent I kind of looked at all of them, and I wanted to understand how they were managing growth. I just wanted to know from my standpoint, all right? And in specific, I looked at the FARs. I looked at height. And then one of the things that Ronnie Mateo, if Ronnie were here, I would give him credit, because Ronnie said, John, but those codes are sort of broad, and we're talking about what's happening along the avenue, this huge boulevard that we've been talking about that's been the vein of our existence, right? And he says, so in reality, it's not really the same. So what I did is I went out and I looked at increased density along major avenues of 3 to 6 lanes. And I actually got a bunch of images if you want to see them. And I looked at buildings that I thought were very tall, not middle of the road, and somewhat smaller, that were adjacent to 2-story, single-story residential areas. And I pretty much took it upon myself with the architects in my office to do all that research, because from what I could tell, that wasn't negotiated in your contract to do that, and I didn't want to continue to harp on something, and so I just took all the excuses away and I did that research myself, okay? And later I can show you the images, but I believe Stefan has my presentation of all of that,
Yeah.
and it's been up for some time since we started. And from that, I've been able to brick and mortar kind of thing, sort of think through some of the things that I actually may believe in. I just had to sort of come to grips to whether I really believe them that much. And I don't know if that happens to you, but you second guess yourself. It's like, do I really believe that? I thought I believed that. So I went through this process, put together all this information, and there are certain precepts that I came to conclusions that are John Medina affirmations. And one of them that I've come to believe in the 40-some years that I'm doing this is that I think that the modern movement created this concept that you had to sort of separate residential from institutional and commercial, and that has proven to be a truly big mistake. Right? That in fact, the previous models in urbanization and where you had mixed use was the direction that cities should go to. In fact, even from the standpoint of energy and energy efficiency. Of course, it doesn't make any sense to be living in, Homestead and driving to downtown every day. The success is everywhere in regards to that concept, the theory that was sort of proposed about 25 years ago. Codes have changed around that, and so I'm a staunch believer in the idea of mixed use. All right, along an urban corridor. So that's the first precept that I can say. Undoubtedly, I believe that we should move in that direction as a community. You put up in your 7 precepts the notion about good architecture, something to that effect.
I know
right?
you guys weren't happy with that.
And
Demand great architecture and then.
demand great architecture. I thought that was.
So did you want to focus on this first item first? Anybody
Yeah,
else?
right. I have to sort of set these theories so that you could get to where I've arrived at. I fundamentally believe that you cannot codify great design. Can't codify it. you can talk about it, you could generalize it, you can put a bunch of adjectives and it has to be great, but not everybody's a great designer, and you're not going to attract great design by talking about it. Right. With that notion, I believe there's another theory that we have to take into account, that you can't stop progress. I believe progress is going to happen whether you like it or not, and we have to prepare for that progress and anticipate that we've created the guidelines and the standards that we can protect the community from design that must be torn up or torn down because it wasn't done properly the first time. And to think about that, most significant buildings have a lifespan of at least 100 years. So we will be stuck with whatever we do. And of course, we have to think of not all of this is going to be done at once. So we have to be visionary enough to create a set of rules that we can always adjust if there are some weaknesses in the process. I think that in Ronnie Mateo's discussion and delivery, he speaks about an architectural review board.
Right.
Right. I believe in the sites that we are really concerned about, and there seems to be 2 that might extend to be larger, and 3 that we're really looking at. It's 5, and that there's a possibility that growth can continue because people buy properties and make them larger and so forth. But right now we're really sort of focusing on the 5 that we should always keep in mind that those 5, because of the acreage, there must be kind of a check valve where, because of the number of acres, that there would be a staff recommendation on those projects when they're presented and proposed, that there is a architectural review board, and I agree with Ronnie and his notes, that there would be an architectural review board that would make a recommendation that would include landscape architects and architects. And then finally a commission meeting that would vote on the designs. Of course, that would come with a process of incorporating the community in those larger parcels. And we should establish a lot size. Is this going to be, and I don't know what it is, so I'm just going to tell you right now. 2 acres, is it anything greater than 2 acres or say 5 acres?
Well, I think in those districts, and I agree, I think to have an architectural review board and a higher level of review and scrutiny for development within those key areas is important. And we can make, I know in the North Pinecrest Business Alternative Districts today, anybody that wants to take advantage of those, that alternative development scenario is required to take their proposal to the village council and for review and approval as a conditional use.
Right.
And I think that.
And I think that with that should be said here, and so that everybody, because I think that we all have a concern of traffic and traffic flows, that any submission of that would require community involvement after there's a transportation study and the environmental study that normally goes along with all of that. And I think that unfortunately, sometimes folks don't know that those standards of environmental and for transportation, that cost is that cost is on the shoulders of the group that's developing a piece of property. But I think it should be a kind of a stipulation so that everyone knows, look, there's these hurdles that are these gate valves that we can shut something off or open so that we understand how traffic is going to flow. With that said, and we've already done it in places in Coral Gables, and I say Coral Gables because I watched it happen, but also here that you have these traffic circles. And these traffic circles are, there have been changes over time, and I think of Coral Gables where the directionality has been studied. There's been streets that are closed off, others that are open, others that are made one way or two ways. At first, very upsetting to me because I travel through there all the time and I don't like them to change my routes. But in time, I've realized that it has slowed down traffic in certain areas where before it was a track, it was a road. You know, how can you get from Lejeune to Douglas? So I think that internally, the community should probably consider, okay, so let's talk about this. How do we transition some of these things that are eventually going to come our way? We've only been talking about our side of the street, but we can anticipate that when I say our side of the street, the US 1 side in this direction, but in the other direction, I suspect that the property is going to be a lot cheaper and larger developments might show up on that side, and we're going to have to sort of take that into account, even though you guys, that wasn't in your budget to look at that, but that side all the way up, it's happening now, all the way down US 1, from 27th, which there's 2 tall buildings in the process, and those are 27 to 30-story buildings, and they lean right over into that single-story residential area on the other side. So, I see that. I don't think that the density is there yet to come this way, but I think that eventually, in the next 25 to 50 years, it may continue going towards our direction, and I can see properties taking on the Pinecrest, like Pinecrest Gardens, but they're really the other side, or these fancy names. So I think that the notion of how we internally deal with how the streets run and their directionality, I think we need to study that, and that may be part of our planning as a city in the evolution. That doesn't minimize what's happening with projects that evolve in the community.
So I think those recommendations need to be part of the Pinecrest Parkway US 1 plan update, and then those recommendations will be implemented over the course of time, some sooner rather than later, but we'll definitely work to implement all the recommendations of that plan.
Right.
So even though it might be a broad recommendation that's included now, it may take a while to implement it.
I understand.
Some things may be implemented sooner rather than, it'll be implemented in stages for sure.
I want to say something about your presentation because I want to give you credit that I think that you opened up a lot of ideas. I think that the one that caught my attention, and we call ourselves a village. I think the one that caught my attention was this sort of hub that became a kind of a city center that would bring mixed use and what happens in each one of the locations, I'm not quite sure, but I think that was inspiring. It was visionary. Because I think that things are going to happen around here whether we want it to happen or not, and we need a center. And I think that when Ronnie and Pepe were here, we were talking about, look, the street is like, we're like bookended. We got a bookend here and a bookend here, and it's just a street. But the notion of having on this street a a point of reference that you could say, this is Pinecrest. It's not that you drive past it or that you go around it to get to your house, but that there's a center to it and that it should be 136. I tend to agree with that concept. What's its major usage? You know, I think I said it, I love that Home Depot a great deal, but I think that there's other places that could, you know, it could be just slightly off the beaten track that we can get to a Home Depot. If someone finds a better utilization for that occupancy, let it be. The economy will determine what that's going to be. I wrote down, and it may or may not be controversial, but I wrote down how to incentivize good developers and good designers to look into purchasing and improving our front facade. You might call it whatever you want, but that's our front, that's our doorway. That's how we walk into this place. Technically, that's like when you get to the Vatican, and those are the main doors. But our doors look like it's the back of the property, right? And then we obviously have those streets that you can find boundaries, and you can find those boundaries. I think that our front facade needs an uplift. You know, as much as I would like, there's certain buildings on that path that I tend to like to see more than others, right? And so I try to come up with a concept, and it may be right or wrong, from the research I've done, and I want to just read them off to you guys. And guys, I know I've been doing a lot of talking, so you guys are gonna, bear with me because I've been doing this for about 16 hours with you guys, like 4 different things, and studying and researching, and so it's my turn.
Yeah.
And you can go for as long as you want, and you can go as long as you want.
Well, it'd be better if it was a conversation rather than a lecture, to tell you the truth.
Well, I'm gonna get through mine, and then you could.
Well,
have
I'm just saying, this is not participatory. I would have to sit here and listen to the whole thing through, and it should be an engaged conversation and not a lecture.
Well,
right now, we're all attending a lecture.
Oh, it may be.
Well,
I want to just get through the points that I wanted to make, and then you're more than welcome, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I will say that option B, which I prepared for two weeks ago, here, which was an order of business, it was B 2 weeks ago, and I didn't give the lecture that you're saying it is, so I appreciate that you commented on it. And it's here again, and this is going to be sort of a focused presentation by you all, but I want to make sure that I have my thoughts said and in our record. So the incentives that I thought of, I think that the code that we have, I think it does a pretty good job. I agree with all of you on the increasing the 0.82 to 1. I don't think it makes a big difference. So I agree with that concept. I do think that to incentivize the project, any projects moving forward, I would incorporate certain things. If you're going to do 3+1, it should be mixed use, like 3 floors. Mixed use, the top 3 floors. Residential top 3 floors. Bottom floor, retail with a piano nobile. Piano nobile, colonnades, all the walkways, the residents, those places that want to have restaurants, etc. If you want to exceed 4 floors, you have to give something back. It occurred to me, well, if you can afford it and you want to provide something pretty lavish, per each floor that you go underground with parking, up to 2 floors, you get 2 floors of development above. but you get rid of the parking at the ground level. And that would give you two more floors. So you go from 4 to 2, that's 6. If a developer can do it. You add another floor if you provide a landscape with banyan trees of a certain caliber, say 24-inch banyan trees, a certain garden of some sort. That becomes a landscape type of garden.
Take this outside. I mean, John, I think you need to,
Yes, speak to
John, you might need to be a little bit clear on what you're expecting of an incentivized approach so that it's a little more.
So that right now the code remains the same how it is, nothing really changes.
Right.
And if you want to get on these properties especially that are the larger parcels, and you want to increase the FAR, that the FAR is based on what you provide back to the community.
I see.
All right, so 4 floors, you know, it's the same as it's always been. If you're going to increase, if you want an increase because the development requires it to be economically of value, that you have to provide certain incentives to those people so that they can get a little more after the 4 floors. Right now, those floors are available. Articulation of buildings, that if you articulate the building and it has the facades, something.
So, John, a lot of these things that you're talking about we kind of cover in some of the other slides.
Right.
But I think, I'd like to hear from the other two
Yeah, I think it's a good time.
committee members,
Okay.
if they agree with that, but if.
Well, I have one last,
Okay.
the one last, I think that the articulation you brought up, that you've talked about it, about the aesthetic. And I think that the articulation of the skyline is one component, and there's the articulation of the walls and the corner conditions. So that would be one and one more. So the maximum number of floors would be nothing greater than 2, 3, 4, 6, at the a maximum 10 stories, as long as you provide all of those incentives. And when I say that is that what you're giving back to the community a certain amount,
Yeah.
and there would be a maximum height established to that. The height would be that of 10 floors. If the developer is capable of providing all of those beautification issues that would improve it.
And we'll just ask, why can't we require those not incentives, but those improvements even with 4 floors?
Right, so I think that's where we're going. So the point of breaking this into themes is so that we're kind of focused on the point of each.
Well, I think we need-
idea.
we need to chime in on
And-
what John just said.
Right, and a lot of these things that you're covering are addressed in some of these other themes. And a lot of them, we already want to require. So articulation, for example, should be a requirement, not necessarily a bonus. But I want to hear from the other committee members about what they think of these incentives and the mix of uses, and if you think that.
Let me chime in. There's a lot that was just discussed, so.
Right.
Sure. Listen, there are a lot. I think there's a couple main reasons. One of the main reasons I'm here is because I know that there's a misconception or there's a fear. There's a fear of the word of density, right? There's really a fear of that. There's a fear of the word of mixed use. These are basic precepts and concepts of city planning and world planning. Our practices around the world, right? And we do things all the time, all to 3,000 acres from 300 square feet. So, these things happen and they challenge us all the time. Some of the best examples of urban city planning in the world could take a place like Paris. There's not a building in the whole place that's taller than 5 stories, right? The whole city, though, is 5 stories tall. So we can take examples and look at this. But I think what the citizens concerned about and what I heard, and the reason I came here is because How do we either allay those fears, inform them about what this is that we're trying to do, and find a way to sort of respond and react a little bit to what the county was trying to mandate on us, which they've, passed the first reading of lessening those demands and those concerns, so we can keep a really just an incremental FAR increase and pacify them in a way. Now, going to other precepts of architecture and controls, we write these controls all the time. They are super, super difficult to write and control. And then you lay on the litigious part of putting a board in place. The Board of Good Taste, Coral Gables has been called that for 50 years. And if anybody's ever been before that and know the arbitrary way that rules get applied and how difficult it is to do things there, you'll understand that that's not an easy answer to trying to quantify or qualify good design. It's extremely difficult. And the ones that we write all the time are typically for developers, sometimes for cities, but we always say it's good to be king, because whoever writes those rules needs one person as a dictator, or you're never going to be really able to enforce them, or you'll get sued, or you'll get something else will happen. So I really think that good design is going to come out of the fact that the cost of land and doing business in Pinecrest is going to be higher than it is other places. We just expressed that, right? Cheaper across the street. Over there, the cheap developer is going to go in and do it. He's going to pay so much for the land here. If he doesn't do a good job, he's wasting. He'll lose his money. He'll waste his money. So you find places where land costs are higher, good development happens almost by osmosis in a way, to a certain degree. Yeah, we have a good set of guidelines in place, so that generally is going to take care of it. I, from the outset, said city center I think would be a great idea. I think 136 is the only place big enough, and I talked with Stephen about this early on. Somebody had the aha moment 10 or 12 years ago when they overlaid Meisner Place on the 136 site. And I don't know if anybody ever had a chance to visit that place, but I was working up there when it was done, and it was such a community revolt against this development, and now it's one of the most beloved places in the city of Boca Raton. And it's a maximum of 6 stories along the thing. The backside is townhouses to covered parking, and has a lot of good things. And it actually is about the size of that site down there. But it's still a place for people to gather. It's still a place for all these things to happen. And it's one of the only places in the city that has enough quantity and ins and outs for traffic and things for something like that to happen. It won't happen other places because it's too hard to get in or too hard to get out, or not enough depth, or you're right. So I think a lot of those things are going to take care. And again, incentives, yeah, find the right incentive. But I think that, maximum height and things like that, I know from the community, I don't think we need to get beyond 5 or 6. And if that were to happen, it would be pushed out to me towards the face of the highway. I think what we have here is endemic of one of the worst exports to the United States, which is strip malls, right? It's really what Pinecrest is a collection of strip malls, which are a pre-World War II development based on cars driving fast, pulling off and then doing their stuff, and it's nothing but parking lots that are shielded with shrubs. I think that's terrible. I think whatever we have in the code, if it can encourage parking in the back or parking collected and more kind of village ensembles of the shops, those would be good things. And I think the opportunity for identity of Pinecrest, because you're not going to be able to mandate enough new, different, good architecture, it really comes to the quotients of landscaping, lighting, and signage. That's what we perceive driving down this road right now, that we can control more easily, because we can't all of a sudden tell everybody to change the buildings, and it won't happen. Yeah, we can, as I said, when it gets replaced, it'll get replaced with better architecture. It'll get replaced with things that are market driven. And the market is asking for more, better, different things. It's not asking us to replace one strip mall with another. So I think some of those things are just cursory in development. So I think that if we can put these things in place that do provide some incentive, that keep the FAR in the, I think your studies, which I had requested too, because I didn't think that the difference between the 0.74, whatever there was, and 1 was significant enough to that we should be too scared or concerned about it. I know enough of planning these things enough that that's an incremental thing, and done well, you can't notice one from the other with a naked eye. You'd have to do the math to figure it out.
What's the number?
It's 0.73.
Yeah, so 0.73 to 1, you could walk in two developments side by side, and unless you were super, super observant and could diagnose the square footage, you're not really going to tell a difference. Building heights, we can tell in a hurry. A small change in FAR, we can't tell. So if that small change in FAR pacifies the county that we're complying with their requests, that we raise the density around these zones that have the hubs, then we've done what we need to do, and it really doesn't greatly affect. In terms of the density and people's fear of residential things, I agree with John about that. That's not a math game. It should be units per acre, not a percentage of the gross building area, but rather units per acre, because then you know, no matter what happens here, there's never going to be more than X units per acre. And that's a number that we can live with. And I don't think we can be prescriptive about the sizes. That's market driven, and it's going to be what the market wants. You tell them to do a unit of a certain size and do this or do that. It's super restrictive.
Do you require a certain amount of parking per unit, like one?
Yeah, absolutely. But you know, the thing about that is you're going to see that it's changing now. I mean, there's projects going on, not just here in Miami, but across the country and in other places in the world right now where parking doesn't exist, but the numbers are going down, right? And households, and it's because of the way people are living. They don't need two cars anymore. They need a car and an Uber, or they need a car and a rail, and it's becoming less and less. Except, I mean, if you make the choice to live in a single-family home away from the nodes, you put as many cars in your front yard as you want. But that's not the way. That's not the way the millennials. I mean, my kids are 34 and 37. You put them there and tell them they got to have two cars. They say, "Are you friggin' nuts?" I mean, that means I have to pay two insurances, two car payments, two gas.
In Miami, or
They're here in Miami, but I mean, but you know, you see the urban flight into Coral Gables. They can't build apartments fast enough because that's where the younger generation wants to live. That's how they want to live. So some of these things will happen, but if you restrict this residential density play by units per acre, then you have no fear that all of a sudden we're going to get 20 apartments or 40 apartments because somebody's taking a percentage of the gross. And I don't even really think it's important about the floors or where they are. I think the idiom of mixed use will sort that self by itself. You don't have to tell them it's on the third or fourth. If they can sell them on the first, what difference does it make? If it's only, it can still be controlled by this a percentage of the whole, but the residential should be on a units per acre basis.
On your question in regards to parking, one of the things that you
So what?
the parking issue that was brought up, you guys showed a model of private partnership, private municipal partnership for parking garages, so that in those larger properties, if there was a submittal that had some kind of relationship like that, where you could, instead of having the strip mall, but you can warehouse a building somewhere else that sort of blends into, which you guys you had presentations that showed these buildings.
Yeah.
I think that's a terrific idea.
That's Meisner Park, as we discussed. It's got a liner townhouses on the back. It's got retail liners on the front. Apartments above, you don't even know the parking's there. It's just in the middle of
And
things.
I don't know how that gets written into the code, by the way, but that would be.
Big failure.
So downtown Dayland is a failure for, I think, different reasons, and I think there was an attention to architecture and design, and it's just not a place that's pleasant to walk in for those reasons. I mean, there's so many things about it that don't work. But when you talk about parking and you know, are you gonna have enough parking spaces? The idea, and the reason why the county wants to have more density around the transit stations is because they want to have people using transit. And so people that want to live there are not necessarily gonna have two cars. Maybe they won't even have one car because they would rather ride transit. So that's really the point. And so you would want to look at parking reductions. You would want to look at even centralized parking. You could do public-private partnerships, but that's, you know.
But you were already. May I ask a question? I'm sorry. May I ask a question? I'm sorry.
So I want to stick with the committee and try and I mean, I'll
Yeah,
defer
we
to
didn't,
the chair.
didn't
and-
want to interrupt Mr. Coolidge, obviously.
I think, again, I think the highlights to me to come here and be here and do this is really to rationalize and ally, as I said, ally and align community concern over what density and mixed use are and what we need to accomplish to sort of pacify those goals. And then, yeah, there's other ways for us to do the identity things. And I think the plan, yeah, dust off a little updating to what you guys had done. But as I had gone through it as a planner too, I thought there was a lot of good things in there, and that it really just needs to be reiterated. And I think what everybody nervous was these concentric zones around these new traffic hubs that said, if you took the worst case scenario and took that half-mile radius and overlaid it over Pinecrest, it would be disastrous. And I agree with that, absolutely agree with it. But that's not now what we're addressing. We're addressing, can we give an incremental bit back to show that we are playing ball with this thing? And we've already had it in place with this overlay mixed use zone for years, as we discussed before. Nobody's taken up on it. It's really hard to assemble all this land, take down what's revenue producing there, put it all back together and make a profit. That's a tough nut to crack. And so it may happen, but it'll be when these things run their useful life and they need to be taken down. It's not going to happen before that. And I live on the backside of one of these things. I hate it. I'd love for somebody to take it down, right? But it has to be the right economic drivers to make those things happen. And when that happens, I do believe it'll be replaced with quality design, because again, you come into Pinecrest to do business, what's driving you there? The market's driving you there. What's it telling you? It's telling me I need better retail. It's telling me I need better F&B outlets. It's telling me I need more green. I got to be comfortable. It's got to be destination. That's what my firm prides, is creating a destination. What developers that are going to take out a big piece of land in Pinecrest, they're going to be focused on creating a destination, because the only way for it to work is for them to bring people there and have them stay there as long as possible. So those things are undercurrents that are at work in the development community. And when you start paying a lot of money for land, you have to do a good job, or you're just writing a bad check.
And then with regard to public comment, I just wanted to respond. There will be an opportunity to ask questions and comment, but for now, we're really hoping to get the input from the committee, since we have not heard from them. And Mr. Ferrara.
Can I just respond to one thing that you said, Doug?
Sure.
We had done an analysis of the existing zoning and what could be built, and that's here on this paper. And what we found is that there was, I don't know if you were here for that presentation.
I unfortunately was traveling.
So there were like 5 different things that weren't supporting redevelopment, that were really restricting it. One was the high requirement for open space, but it wasn't any kind of meaningful open space. The high parking requirements, the requirement for parking in between the buildings, and there's the limit of residential. So in the best kind of case scenario, trying to do something mixed use in those business alternative district, which is the only place where it's allowed, you're not really getting much of anything. And so that's one of the reasons why nothing's being built, is because there's not enough there, and there's so many restrictions that you can't build anything.
The alternative plans that you did up on the North District side, and
Right.
that's the one I know, because I live right off the Kendall, right back, a block or so back. And I thought you did some creative things, and I looked at that. Was there anything in there that you would have had to ask for exception to do? Because you had done one where, you know where the Ross and all that stuff is in back of the bank? And you had done one where you took the residential that's just to the east and made it a little taller, but made a sort of a public square and then buildings around it. Was there anything in that solution that you did that you couldn't do under today's zoning ordinance?
None of it could be done, because you're required to have parking in between the buildings, a certain amount of parking. You're required to have open space in between the buildings. So
So you can't, so there's not a way to collect them?
The site planning requirements restrict what the building footprint looks like.
Okay.
So that's really what we're exploring,
Okay.
like how could you change
No.
that? And that's really important to understand, because that's why you don't have development right now. I mean, even though the land is valuable and it's a valuable community to be in, and there's obviously money to be spent, they can't build what they want to build.
They can't build meaningful destination. So
Yeah.
I take that and I agree with that. And if that's a flaw in the existing zoning, because we've been more focused on FAR and the parking stuff, if there's a flaw in the way those aggregate spaces are taken together in a large lot, so that you can take these green spaces that are mandated here, 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 and here and collect them. Same with the parking. If you can take the parking required between the building here, here, and put it all together so that over here you can do a village around a green, I'm all for it, because that fundamentally doesn't change the amount of development that's done on the site. It's just the way that it's put together. So if there's restrictions in the zoning thing, again, it's a long, big code. I didn't go at that detail. Let you guys do that. I hate going through those things. But I think if that's a restriction that's in there and we can find the right way to get around that wording, we won't do anything that I think we're doing to like take density or mixed use and push it down your throat, because that's not what I think the purpose of this thing was. It was to listen to what you guys have to say and what you have to fear, and try to figure out also what's coming down the pike and what's being pushed from government and county, and try to make sure that we can provide for it in a way that Pinecrest wants. So I do believe that those kind of modifications to the code would be absolutely beneficial, and I honestly really wasn't aware that it parceled out the open space and parking requirements and threw it that way, because no doubt if you can collect them, they're way more efficient and they give you way better opportunity to create place.
In the Meisner Park example was overlaid on the Home Depot property and those properties to the north of Home Depot.
Right. No, it took a few more in to get it done. Right. No, I understand that.
John, we want to make sure you have some time to chat. Thanks for being patient.
I'm a landscape architect, so my perspective of things is a little different. I've lived here all my life. I've lived in a few different areas of Pinecrest. I've ridden my bike everywhere, walked everywhere. For me, I feel like all the commercial has is back to us. And I feel like if we had ways that we could walk from the houses and walk into the developments, it was a little more welcoming from our direction. You know, because US 1, the only people I see using the sidewalk are the homeless with the shopping cart around the Dayton. You don't see a lot of people walking along US 1, but I think there's opportunity here. Like, let's say on the other side of this park, there's a big open space between here all the way to 120th. If you had a nice wide sidewalk and then it connected, you know, people would come here to go to the French place for lunch, and you know, people from Pinecrest would come this way. And I don't know how that can happen, but
So
I'm here to kind of figure it out.
That was one of the goals, I think, of the 2012 plan, was to allow for better accessibility from the residents that live east of US 1 to get to the commercial development from the east without having to necessarily drive onto US 1 to do that, to provide pedestrian access points and even vehicular access from the east, and maybe orient some of it more to the east and not have just such a functional service entrance, but more of a friendly, accessible entrance so that residents can approach it.
Where you have the Dixie Belle Shopping Center, you have the parking garage there. So no one, you know, there might be a way to scurry through, but it's not a feeling that anybody who lives there who wants to go to Daily Bread, you know, they'll get in their car and drive on US 1 and go to Daily Bread. They won't walk. If they live 2 blocks away, they're not going to walk. So I just feel like it would be really nice to, and maybe you do create sort of like a pedestrian parkway, you know, from like 120th to here, that goes along this way, and then you collect people. I live near Pinecrest Gardens. I see people when they have the market, tremendous amount of people going up Killing. And I think, oh my God, that never happened. But they're going to the market, and it's families, it's kids, it's moms, it's grandmothers. So it'd be nice if that was happening this way, for people to come to places along here.
So how do we accomplish that?
I don't know.
But it can be done.
So I have a question in regards to the highway itself, and I'm not sure if you can answer But one of the, and it keys into what you just said now about pedestrian accessibility across the street. Are we allowed, or can we actually have a change in materials that crosses over? I'm not saying to do it, I'm just saying, so for example, if we wanted to insert a paver pattern that crossed over, would the Department of Transportation
US
say-
1 are you talking about?
Yeah, US 1.
No, well, no way.
So,
No,
because that was something that was brought up 2 or 3 times. And I stayed silent on it because I didn't want to be the poo-pooer on that idea, where you create those points of connection across the street. And if that's the case, that we're kind of alienating, we stay alienated from the other crossing over, which is the point that you're making, is like you take the car, you drive to the other side, right?
But anybody trying to cross US 1 knows you can't cross it. As I said, I live up by Dayland, and I can't get over to downtown Dayland because I can't get across that section. We would walk it any time, we would walk it, it's really, really close.
I think you're talking about accessing commercial development that's on the east side, but accessing it from the
other
east.
side.
Are you talking about accessing it from the west to the?
Yeah, across US 1 to the other side, which, okay, as a big concept, we're talking about boulevards, avenues, streets, and paths that are pedestrian and bicycle lanes, right? It's a hierarchy of how to transport, to move. And so it was discussed at one, I heard a couple people go, well, how do we get to the other side? How does a chicken cross the street? One of those. How do you cross over? And so you create these linking verbs that link across the street. Well, and my question is, I know that there are federal guidelines. Whenever I've had to do a driveway or something to a federal highway, it always takes 6 months to a year of just getting the access point approved. And you kind of stay away from that because it burns you when you're designing, right?
Yeah.
So it's like it slows down the entire process. So you change the way you access. And we're talking about this because we're saying, okay, so you want more density and you want people to cross the street, but you're going to leave the thing the same way. You're not going to make the connection point where people feel safe, that you feel like cross here. There's a cluster of trees. You reduce speed. Those design features that establish linking.
Well, like even, let's say for example, from 120th, you have that weird gas station that has the empty lot behind it. Then you have the other shopping center where the IHOP is. There's no way to get from here to there. It's just if that popped through. So what if you did like Coral Gables has the Coral Gables pink, the sidewalk. Maybe Pinecrest is the yellow. We have the big yellow, so you do a big yellow concrete and you cross the street and you do the yellow sidewalk going across the street. But it'd be for us. It's on our side.
It's on our side.
It would collect all the people who live to then utilize and maybe go to the IHOP and then say, oh, okay, maybe
And I
we'll
agree
go.
with that. And I'm totally, you said it the first time, I got it, I thought it was great. We should link amongst our streets. But let's face it, this whole thing is happening on the other side, right? So, I'm not saying to do it because I don't like it. But for example, across the University of Miami, that bridge that they built over the thing, right? I've never seen anyone cross over that way. All right, or the other bridge that's over there, and it sort of divides the corridor. But at least there was an attempt.
Yeah.
It may not be a successful one. but there's an attempt of like, okay, we don't want our students to get killed, so let's build, you know, an elevator, a ramp, you know, this thing that goes over and blah, blah, blah. But at least you know that that's a crossing point. Like, you know, do we need a series of you know, obelisks on our side of the street to say, cross here with blinking lights, that, or is it, you know, a European model, like, you know, like the English have those phone booths, you know, and if you remember, and by the way, Coral Gables, I agree, sometimes has the good taste board. They may call it that all you want, and I you know, and to get up in front of those guys, it you know, at first it's kind of but at the end of the day, everybody's trying to get to the same place. The aesthetic, I tend to agree that for major projects, an architectural board should be involved, kind of like what we've done, and people share ideas. And I know a lot of those designers that sit on their boards, and they're good designers, and they really actually care for their communities. So I don't call it a good taste board, and I'm not saying it in any negative way. I know people have criticized it a lot, but they're usually the ones that are doing the bad designs. And there's a bunch of guys that are on the other side saying, you know what, back to the drawing board. And I've been there and I've watched, and most of the time when the stuff is good, people compliment the work. So I tend to feel that should remain. But on the transportation thing, and if we're going to create, if there's some things we have that I'm kind of glad that we've talked about, some things outside of just what the community and the concerns about the traffic along US 1. But there's some buildings that are going up right now in the residential areas of Pinecrest that, you know, I don't get it. And they're big boxes, and they maximize square footage, and you know, it's a little troubling. It's a little troubling because it doesn't necessarily improve things. So, I don't know how people feel about that, but I think to tear down some of the gems in Pinecrest, to trade them for these big boxes, because you know you're going to create, you know, square footage is worth more money. I think that's a little troubling. So I tend to believe that if you want to, I'm not saying dictate taste. I'm saying, you know, have some gate valves.
Right.
I think that might, a board like that where if Pinecrest architects and landscape architects and designers, it
But
may
John,
not be
if
effective.
you don't have seriously tight constraints, I know everybody uses those things to find loopholes. We all do as architects. You come into a community that's got a real super strict set of guidelines, and all the houses look almost the same. You say, even Seaside they did it. You know, when Robert put those controls on that property when he did it 40 years ago, everybody's angle is, how do we mess with these rules, stay within the rules, but make it different, you know? So, you know,
We can disagree. We can disagree to agree.
and you should see how restrictive those covenants are. They're down to the size of the fascia and the length of the overhang and everything.
Liz and Andre took it to a level that they were creating a fake, false facade on buildings.
No, I'm talking about the houses.
That cracker style architecture was all about the look and not necessarily about the.
Regardless, it was only an example. I'm not criticizing Duane for what they did there.
No, but you're talking about the safeguards, and those planning ideas came from them, and yeah, there's some issues with them, but let's face it, there's a lot of great architecture as a result of their concept of mixed use, residential with commercial.
I know, John, but you're talking about rewriting an entire code for existing city if
course
you're putting
not.
these.
No,
Yeah, you
no.
are. How can you control the way a house is done?
And I think that it's important to say, which is the premise of my argument and discussion, is I think our code is pretty good. I didn't see a weakness in it, and I know that there is a certain limitation of height that I've looked at and I've considered it. And I've thought to myself, look, it's not only what the developer is going to do, but there may be those properties that nobody does anything with them because they're not attractive enough to do anything with, and the owners can't do anything with them. So they just sort of leave them there to warehouse all those parking spots, and they stay there forever. And that's why maybe there wasn't great success in the last code modifications you guys did. I don't know, but I didn't see substantial change. And I think that there's a lot of interest in Pinecrest, but it has to be, and I agree with you, economically, the economy is going to be determining what's going to be purchased and what's going to be developed. But you have to give incentives to both sides. The owner of the property to say, hey, look, my thing is really, really valuable, but I don't have the money to do anything with it. It's just sitting there. Maybe someone else will purchase it and provide something of greater value. And the same thing is true of the developer that's looking at the property. That's the relationship that has to exist.
Right.
So if you don't provide people the interest to look at the property, it's never going to move. The same animal clinic, the same other thing, the same things are going to be along that street. Because let's face it, the value really hasn't gone up enough so that someone would really look at it with interest. And so when I talk about the word incentive, boy, my concepts of incentive are at many levels. You have to allow everybody the opportunity to review that space. Maybe it's being what's the right word? Underestimated? Underutilized. If someone else does have the money to invest, to provide something creative, I think it's important. The one thing I wanted to say when I say articulation, listen, on the smaller lots, and I think that you could count most of them, this really doesn't apply. The maximum you're going to get is what's in the code, 4 stories.
Right.
It's never going to get past 4 stories. Maybe you argue about 1 story. Okay, 3 to 4. Oh, no big deal. We're the Champs-Élysées of Miami, 4 stories. Put a mansard on the top of the building, you're done. You have you're the one side of Champs-Élysées. Okay? All right, so we're done. We got rid of all of that.
Well, John, you have seen code today, right?
Right.
That's not changing.
I know, that's what I'm saying. All you need is a mansard roof, dormers, copper at the top, the little frillicky thing, all right? And some cute signage, a couple of bakeries, and you're good to go. Some bread, and you come in, you come out, and you pick up your loaf of bread. So the majority of the strip is there. That more than likely will never change. Now, if someone wants to invest an enormous amount of money to do more, well, let them see what they can do with the other properties if they think they can. More than likely they won't. I've agreed with you all along on that. The subject is really the 5 parcels that are large enough. And I think that we really truly have to make it something of interest that people might want to
Melissa,
do something with.
have you guys, when you reviewed that and found those flaws, what we might agree are flaws in the code, did you recommend any kind of language or anything that would make that would take that code and allow you to do the things that you suggested in your concepts for those properties? I mean,
So that's kind of where we are now.
okay.
And what we try to do, to be a little bit, it's hard. I know everybody kind of wants to talk about the things that are, on their mind. What we're trying to do is kind of itemize everything and put it, organize it in a particular way. And we're looking for feedback from you because
Well, then that would be one of mine. Is what you did, I thought, was some inventive, some nice planning on the site that you say the code won't allow us to do. So what would be your recommendations to the modification of code that will allow you to execute that plan, which I think was a good urban plan?
We'll develop that language.
Yeah, so
So
what
that's
then
great.
in the end of the day, there's something that section 6 sub C whatever says this, we recommend it say this, because then we could consolidate the green spaces into a particular park. We could
No.
consolidate the parking into one area, and that would allow us to keep the same FAR on the site, but put it together in a much more beautiful way.
Yeah, that will definitely be done to allow for
Okay.
implementation of the plan. The first step is to define the plan, and
Yeah.
I think your
Right,
recommendation
so-
is that we allow for,
Yeah, I think, yeah, so that's why I said I didn't know, yes or no, that the solutions you provided were, made any code violation. You're violating a couple codes,
Right.
or a little bit of language in some subsections of the code, and what modifications it take to make that plan doable.
So the exercise that we did was to develop something using the FAR one, understanding that we wanted to do a variety of uses.
Right.
And kind of understanding and being considerate and thoughtful of what's surrounding, the
I know,
parcel.
I thought it accomplished
So-
all that, that's why I was wondering.
Right, so
what the
now what
obstacles
you
were.
need to do is, if that's something that you all liked, we'll go back and dissect it, specifically to, all the things in this presentation, so.
Yeah, where's the?
Just go to the next one.
But we're in agreement that the one going from 0.82 to 1 Mach fulfills the
Right.
high velocity.
Right, and you can do that in so what's important to understand is that you can achieve the 1.0 FAR in 4 stories.
Right.
If you go to 6, you're not gonna get a good design because you don't have enough FAR. So if you wanted more height, you'd have to look at building more, area.
Well, I think that when talking about that, I just wanted to make sure that, I think we're all, things that matter that I think we all agree, and I don't know, if that the FAR of 1
Okay.
pretty much meets the plateau that doesn't change the code much at all, and it stays the same. So I think that that's the first threshold that we've arrived at. We also reached that threshold that the unit per acre
Yeah, dwelling per acre over percentage.
was going to be 34, instead of 150, which was first announced, and it caused major terror.
I think we've determined that 25 units per acre is a pretty good number. It's what's in the comp plan now. It's not in the land development regulations, we just allow 12, but the comprehensive plan does anticipate up to 25 units per acre to support transit-oriented development. And I would suggest that higher density be allowed in those 5 districts that we
Except that we've developed these concepts and we have to back into it and say, you like these concepts, it's within the FAR, it's within the height, and what does that work out to in terms of dwelling units per acre? So I don't have that number off the top of my head now, it's on my computer, and
Yeah, and it's gonna have to do with market-driven sizes, because
Right.
as soon, if you're doing, 700-foot micro apartments, it's one thing, and if you're doing
Right.
1,700 square foot, 2 or 3 bedroom units, it's another.
that's a good point too. When you do a percentage, it takes into account the size of the use in comparison to the overall building. If you do dwelling units per acre, you don't have as much.
Yeah, but, well, maybe there's a compromise in there that
Right.
you can allocate percentage to units per acre, because I think that units per acre
Okay.
is a number that the public
Right, okay.
would want to feel comfortable, so they understood that when you say density increase, and you then tell them it's 50% of the GFA,
Right,
their mind's blown, right? So you're gonna have to say, look, we used to allow 12, or the existing zoning allows for 24, we're still, advocating for 24. We're just advocating to put the site together in a different fashion, or whatever you're advocating exactly. If it went up to, another, but if it's within that realm, then we haven't done anything to cause any alarm or any substantial change.
And I'll just add
And
that.
you spoke it in plain English.
Yeah, no, that's what my fear is about communication, right? And,
The
and getting in front of that.
City of Miami has 150 dwelling units based on the 21 code. The Miami-Dade is 125.
In which zone?
Well, Yeah, I'm generalizing.
Is that in the downtown, or is that in the, is that in?
That's the current code. What we did is we took each one of the densities for each one of the zones. And so what I did is I just wanted to have a sense of what those are, and they're all there.
Wait, but which zone is that? T8, T10, is it one that's in?
They're here. I'll let you look at that. I'm sort of generalizing the topic. If you go through each one of them, Coral Gables has 125 possible. Pembroke Pine, the allocation is flexible. It's based on a certain different rate. The West Palm has 20 dwelling units. Boca Raton has 20 dwelling units. So when you put it into context, 24 is actually a very good number.
Yeah.
When you say, oh, look, you could go, all of these people are doing this, and, you know, we were at 12, but, you know, Boca and West Palm are at 20.
Yeah, I think 20 to 25 is the number
number.
we should probably be striving for.
So I think that could be that threshold that meets the requirement of the county. And then from that point on, you could sort of improve, you know, listen, everything stays the same. We're going to go to 1, 25, and we've resolved that issue with the FAR, and we have that issue. Now, if you go above that, what's it going to be?
Well, one thing I want to bring
Let's
up
wait for that.
on this slide is the height, because that was one of the comments that Ronnie had, the height of each floor. So right now, I think your floor, the ceiling height is 12, or?
I don't think the code
So-
specifies a height between floor and ceiling.
Right,
It just
so
has
you
a
have a
building height
maximum
and number of
height.
stories. So it'd be,
Yeah,
yeah,
so it's 4 stories or
30
35
feet.
feet, right? So that's not really 4 stories.
No.
So so what Ronnie has pointed out was your minimum floor height, typically it's 15 to 20, right? So that you can accommodate the loading for the trucks. So for those who don't know, so your first floor is usually you have your loading dock so that you can, you know, for retail or if it's residential, and that accommodates the height of a truck. And so that's why it's important for the first floor to go up to 15 to 20 feet, so that you can accommodate that loading. This would be
But
interior.
the tallest truck,
building.
I mean, I'm going to disagree. The biggest trucks around are 12 or 13 feet, or they can't even drive down the road. So you don't need to be anywhere near 20 feet for the first floor. Typical retail space in the first floor, you have a 10 to 12 foot ceiling, 2 foot of cavity space, so maybe max out at 15.
15.
That would even allow you with a dock. So you don't have, I mean, that's as tall as you need to be for sure.
But I want to just add, I want to add to that concept, and Melissa, it matters. The concept of piano noble is that colonnade, that floor is 1.5, usually 1.5 stories. And so in that pedestal that exists at the base of the building, it doesn't look like it's just one more floor, but it just got modified by it's the base of the building, and it's usually 1.5 stories. And when you say piano noble, in any other great cities, it's where the colonnades are, where the people dine outside, where there's mixed use, and where there's activity. It doesn't look like an office building, and I agree with you that when you say 35 feet and you have a piano noble, you just knocked off half floor. So that's why the retail incentive with the mixed use would be that would be the incentive.
I
Look,
think-
you get that if you add the piano noble, you make it a true base of your building. Which is what
I don't think you can do it in less than about 48 feet, because you need somewhere around 12, or, 14 or 15 for that first floor to work. And then for luxury kind of apartments, if you're going to sell apartments at a good price, you can't have less than a 9-foot ceiling.
Right.
It just has to be there, right?
Yeah.
And then with the slab thickness, some plenums over your kitchen and stuff, maybe you can get away with 10 to 11 floor to floor, which would leave you that area. So if you took 15, 11, 11, 11, you're at 48. So I don't really think 35 is untenable for four-story construction in a commercial aspect.
11 is tight, because
No,
the
11
convention is.
Yeah, but if we're
12.
talking apartments in,
Yeah.
in a commercial use space, and the kind, it's probably fine. I mean, and I think, so say maybe max out at a 50-foot threshold, because the 15 on the first could be 14, you spread that around, I mean, but you, somewhere in there, you do that, and you let them make decisions and let the market drive that thing, but
So you're talking about 48 feet for a four-story building?
yeah, there's no way to get it in 35. I mean, the Florida Keys has a 35-foot height restriction on it, and that's to the peak of the roof from the crown of the road. And it means you can only really do 2 stories by the time you get over the flood. This is gonna do the same thing. If you said 35, it's a 3-story building.
It should
It's a
be-
3-story
it should
building.
be-
I have a question. So what you're suggesting is with that 48-foot requirement, you can still do the larger first floor.
You have to. If you're gonna do a restaurant, the kitchen's gotta have hoods, it's gotta have stuff, and so you need some space
What's
in
our
order.
current code?
Well, you said 35,
It's
but I think
35.
something interesting that came out of this was we don't really need to ask for extra floors according to Melissa's diagnosis. She says that the 1.0 is a 4-floor structure. And if you try to take a 1.0 and stretch it to 6, you're gonna get something tall and thin that doesn't really function.
I'm sorry.
So we don't really have to, in the existing code at a 1.0, we're not looking for additional height, additional floors.
Our code is 45 feet.
45.
45.
Okay, so we're close. You could just make it work depending on how we measure it, Stephen. How,
And
just
low
measure from
density-
crown of road to the parapet, crown of road to the peak of the roof, or crown of road to the top tie beam. How's that measured? If that's,
It's to the peak of the roof.
okay, well then if you want something that looks residential in a 4-story thing, you can't have a peaked roof, or you can only get 3 floors.
So the
That's a-
low
that's a
density,
minor
45, the
modification.
low density.
Yeah, very-
What you're talking about.
Yeah. No, I think it's
That's
minor.
35 for moderate density, low, medium density, 35, 35, 35. We got 45 for low density. But I'm gonna just add one thought, which goes to Melissa as to architecture. Let's just put aside the number for a minute. If you have a height restriction, that above what the 35 and the 45 is, but you have a qualification as to the articulation of the skyline, where suddenly that architecture at the top incorporates, just as an example, a dome or a peak roof or something to that effect, and it changes the skyline, right? And so you need, I agree, 45 feet seems to be reasonable for four stories.
But as you
Maybe-
said, penthouses and aberrations above, because you're gonna need an elevator overrun.
Right, so you
You're
have-
gonna need
right.
some other things that break
Yeah.
that plane.
So the point that I was getting at is, maybe that hard and fast number of 45 doesn't have to exist, but listen, you get 4 stories, if you provide a piano nolet, you get that height opportunity, and it becomes taller, you have a base, and then the capital, the skyline, you get a benefit if you create a skyline or an edge that you articulate the corner or
Right.
the edges or the core.
I understand.
Is there a way to say like 80% of the top is 45 and then you're?
That's
The
not
20%
that's not
We'll work on
atypical.
it.
That's not atypical that there's a percentage of the roof area that's allowed to exceed the general guidelines. That's pretty normal.
So,
pretty
Melissa,
long.
do you want to go through the rest of your presentation?
Right, so on this slide, I just want to point out, like, one of the things we're thinking of in terms of the framework is a maximum floor plate. Right, because you talk about, like, how do you create, what are some of the constraints? I don't know if you guys like that or not.
Well, to me, it's not so much a maximum floor plate, but the articulation of the floor plate, right? Because if you did a floor plate that was, again, if I did one that was like this, as opposed to one that was like that, and this wasn't meant to demonstrate floor plates, it was
Yeah.
thinking about strip malls. But that's really okay with me, where that is really not, right? So I think if you're looking at maximum plates, it has to do with the articulation of the plates, because they can be way bigger than you want if they turn corners and have a little tower in a corner. So that plate can actually be substantial, depending on how you put it together. So that plate thing is a little bit tough. It's a
Okay.
little bit tough.
The maximum floor plate maintaining existing setback. This is it's a loaded question. When you take a parcel and you combine 4 or 5 and you create the covenant that all this is one parcel, the criteria pretty much changes, though. You can build that as one lot, you know? So let's say, for example purposes only, 5 acres, covenant, forever will they be married. At that point, the setbacks and all of that continue to be the same, correct? Stefan, it's more of a question for you. In Pinecrest, I've never run into that because I'm not taking 10 acres or 20 acres. You know, at that point when there's 20 acres available, do you really have to change the code to say, okay, you need parking at each one of the small parcels that just became one great big?
No, they don't need to be at each parcel, there just needs to be sufficient parking to accommodate the uses on site.
So as long as and I guess I'm saying that so that maybe there isn't really a change in the code, because if the parcel is large enough and the setbacks are pretty much the same, that it sort of, it'll work itself out with the issue of parking and landscape and all that kind of stuff. And you're not really generating something that's overchanging the code. I don't think the code changes when you've got a great big.
Well, that's the question I asked John, and that's what she said. She couldn't produce the plan that we looked at, and some of us liked it. I don't know if everybody liked it, but you couldn't produce that plan under the existing code because of the restrictions in the way that it's put together. Well, then you have to change it in order for that to be able to be developed.
No.
Or you can't do that idea under the existing code.
I don't necessarily agree.
Well, okay. She says you can't do it under the code. She said you can't do it under the code.
Well, I don't.
Oh, so you're telling her that she's not right.
I don't completely agree with you. I'm right now I'm just bringing to your attention that when I have done various smaller pieces, and I've dealt with a city that has a architectural committee, sort of like, let's not talk about Coral Gables anymore because I think their city is a pretty damn good city. But the city of Miami Beach has an architectural board, and they've managed to do some very successful things there, where people have to come up and present their ideas. So I do think that within our code, there's a lot of the things that we've talked about that you could probably do and incorporate. Now, maybe it has to be more specific as to, well, if you're going to do a large urban scale plan of 20 acres, then, you know, there has to be a little more consideration that you may not need as much parking. Right. Which would be a reduction in parking, which is one of the things that I believe we should really truly consider, if that's part of what we're trying to attempt here, that we're not trying to warehouse as many cars.
Yeah, no, a number of developers and property owners have taken advantage of the shared parking provisions of our code that allows them to reduce the amount of parking based on the uses that they have and the hours that the various businesses are open. And so what I always look for when I drive past the property is how many parking spaces are vacant and available, because you don't want a sea of unused parking, obviously. But I find that in most of the shopping centers, there's not a great excess number of parking spaces available. So I don't think we're requiring too much parking. There might be an opportunity for reduction in parking spaces for some other uses. We've gone through that exercise for restaurants. But you don't want to go so far that you create a problem either, because I've seen it on the other side where they've reduced parking so far that it has created real political and practical problems within the community. But that having been said, I understand we don't want to require more parking than is absolutely necessary. I like the idea, and I'll just say real quick, because I know these guys have a presentation they want to complete, but in the city of Naples, Florida, for example, they accepted donations, payments in lieu of providing parking on the property when they redeveloped Fifth Avenue, for example, in the city of Naples. Rather than a property owner having to provide parking spaces on site, they paid money into a fund, utilized that parking area that they'd otherwise have to provide parking for and develop to a higher density, provided money into a fund, and then the city took that money and built a parking garage. The problem in the village of Pinecrest, I think, is the linear pattern of development. There's not really a center where that might work as well. But if we could create a center down by Home Depot, maybe there could be a parking garage with some height and require less surface parking.
So I was going to move on to the next. I think these will be a little bit, well, this one might not be, but we've covered a lot of this stuff already. In terms of architecture, what measurable design criteria should be included. So these are the things that we want to include that are going to help make a better building. And it might be too prescriptive, but we've used this in other cities. Transparency on the ground floor and just overall transparency. Requiring parking structures to have liners. Liners, is, for those of you who are still here, is when you have, because when I first heard that word, I was totally confused. And you have a parking structure, but you actually have uses in front of it. So you might have apartments in front, so that you don't perceive the parking structure, you don't see it. It's hidden behind architecture. Building articulation, specific guidelines for articulation. More important when you get into taller buildings, but I think this could be appropriate. Building length and building separation, and that also goes to block size. So if you think about, you don't want to have one long building. You want to have, a building that's broken up, because that can be very monotonous and uninteresting. And some examples that the community didn't like are buildings that are long, overly long, blank walls, horizontal projections, so awnings and eyebrows. And I think blank walls is important, because when you talk about parking structure, you don't want to have big blank walls, and that's a concern.
Is the liner thing, I'm just,
Yeah.
because this is the first time I heard that, the
Oh,
idea
okay.
of liner.
Okay.
But is it, what you mean is that the front part is retail, at the top, to the top, or is it just the bottom floor, and then the back is, let's say, parking? So is it,
I think it's shops and
In Meisner Park, the backside is townhouses, and there's
So-
townhouses over apartments, so they
Right,
make
so-
a little,
So imagine
shield.
like a courtyard building,
Right.
and inside is the parking structure. So you have to have some exposure for ventilation,
right,
but for the most part, you build around that.
so
So
the building, okay, so the
So
parking.
your Miami Beach example, or your Coral Gables example, you have like the parking podium in the tower, and the podium has uses, so it has
Right.
apartments, or it has townhouses in the back, so you don't actually see the cars because
Right.
they're covered with building.
Okay.
but typically it's only gonna work on a site of a certain dimension, because the parking has an efficiency that has to be
Right.
dictated, and then by
Yeah.
the time you put a liner on it,
Right,
it's fighting two ends to the middle, but it's a good solution if you can
Yeah.
make it work.
yeah, that's a good
I
point.
think in the larger parcels, I think it would be terrific if you could, the notion of warehousing cars on the ground floor, and just all that sitting there is a mistake. And I think everyone's getting away from that, where they want to control those cars as utilitarian, as opposed to the thing that you're looking at, that our streets are made up of, just driving as opposed to experiencing,
Right.
right? So I agree with I like the liner idea. I think the liner idea is a good idea.
The other thing that would help is a percentage of active ground floor uses, so active, uses, like uses that are open to the public, like restaurants and not necessarily offices, some offices, but it's gotta be services and retail and restaurants and things that people can go into that are open. And so then, of course, some of the building is set aside for entrances and for driveways and for parking garage entrances. But this is a way to kind of prescribe, in a way, the activity on the street.
What are some that you think that aren't open? I guess would be my question. What constitute a non-open
So,
use?
private offices, storage, garage, warehouse,
All
you know.
types to it.
You know, that,
And so now you bring that up, is the, so it's not, that's not the notion that you could have many different restaurants on the street. It's not an adjacency issue that a gas station next to, I don't know, what would be the enemy of a gas station? Well, pretty much everything, but would you would have to have certain tenant space that would all sort of fall into that category of occupancy, no? Would that be a change in the code
No, I don't think
for occupancy of the
No,
ground
no,
floor?
so-
Or no?
So what it's saying ground floor in terms of, for new buildings, so think of the 136th Street concept that we showed. You're walking down the sidewalk, you're walking in between two buildings. On the ground floor of that street, it's retail, it's restaurant, it's not gonna be a gas station, because that's not, that's not building,
So
so.
I agree with you. And
Yeah.
I guess what from a very pragmatic standpoint, is that in the code as it's written, it would limit certain occupancies in a project of that nature. Like, just from the standpoint of occupancies and adjacencies to certain things. So,
Wait.
like you said, gas stations, right?
Not necessarily adjacencies, but it would limit, like you wouldn't want to have a storage facility, or you wouldn't want to have, there's these,
Agree.
like the compute, the storage for, computer
agree.
servers.
I'm thinking from a practical standpoint,
Right.
that gets changed as a limitation in the occupancies that are acceptable for that parcel that would be mixed use.
Right, you would want to have uses that were open to the public.
Right.
And it would be a percentage, it wouldn't be 100%, it could be like 60 on Main Street and, 40 on a side street, but that kind of sets an expectation of the types of uses that you're expecting on the ground floor. The other thing is building materials. Right, so high quality, durable materials, I think is really important. We talked about the design review board, and I know that can be a pain. We've had to deal with design review boards, and it hasn't always been easy. But I think we have some good things to think about with that, some good suggestions.
Especially within those Pinecrest business alternative districts.
Yeah,
Right.
that's what we're suggesting.
Right. A project of a certain size, a project within that, I'm calling it the transit area overlays. I think we might want to change the terminology that we're using.
We're gonna do.
And we talked about incentives. We only have 7 slides, so we're almost done. Public realm, so this is a chance for John to chime in a little bit more. So one of the things that we do is create standards for different spaces. And when we did the visioning session, this image was one of the most popular. People like the idea of having these plazas and spaces. And so one of the things that we thought we could do is require a certain percentage of open spaces, which would include these different types of open spaces, courtyards, which are framed by buildings, passageways, which go in between buildings, plazas, which are more formal parks, and pocket parks, which are smaller. And then having specific standards of dimensions and seating, and so that you're getting something of value, you're not just getting this leftover space. And even things like a build-to zone, where you would require the buildings to kind of to build to a certain line to create that space. So those are some of the things we're thinking about in terms of open space standards. And then streetscape standards around the station areas, minimum sidewalk width. We have another slide that talks about street hierarchy, so you have different levels of streets.
Would you almost like create a pattern over the whole city of like pedestrian pathways, and then say, okay, you need to make a connection to that somehow, or you need to tie into these? As how are you tying into the east-west? You know, US 1 is north-south, but how are you encouraging the east-west movement?
Yeah, I think that, like I said, was part of the 2012 plan and needs to be better emphasized in this plan to allow for that connectivity.
Yeah, that's on another slide. Well, that's the last one, here. So let me
Can you go back, you showed a photograph,
Well,
before seven.
yeah, I just wanted to continue with John's point about the pedestrian connectivity. So on this, we'll go back. On this section, enhancing connectivity for pedestrians and bicycles, it suggests creating a street hierarchy and creating a block size and looking at avenues, which are primarily for cars, and then all your requirements for active ground floor uses and garage entrances and driveways relate to these different street types. So a primary pedestrian street would have a requirement for active uses on the ground floor. The secondary streets would be the ones that would have more of the back of house and the garage entrances, and then the residential streets would have a different character. And so one of the things that Ronnie Matthews suggested was, in terms of standards for sidewalks and trails, requiring connections through multi-use paths along Pinecrest Parkway. He also recommended having cross-connectivity among parcels for cars and pedestrians. And we took it further to say having standards for parking and loading. And that goes to this thing. When we talk about transitions, because it came up many times that the community wanted transitions between the existing single family and what's going to be built. And we agree that that's really important. And I had one gentleman who talked about the noise from some of these existing strip malls that his home backs up against. And so we can start talking about buffers and setbacks, and I think everybody's in agreement on that. But then taking it one further step is looking at noise and activity behind buildings and limiting hours of operation for loading and for trash removal, so that it's during the day and not like early in the morning or late at night when it would be bothersome for the people that live next door. So air conditioners and even considering having a time frame for compliance with existing buildings that are a nuisance to the residents that live next to them.
On this photo, on this image here,
Yeah.
at the bottom of the John, the notion of greenscape or the canopy. Do we incorporate some standards of this nature to sort of establish the hierarchy? And I tend to believe that we should, especially on the larger parcels. That it doesn't become, we're going to cram as many little buildings in there and the avenues, streets and lanes are going to be very narrow, and you're going to get as much building as you can. But so I would encourage something that had to do with this, with that canopy that becomes part of the, of those
Right.
avenues and streets and bike.
Well, and it helps to visually buffer too.
Absolutely.
Any building. Yeah.
But I don't think that our code has any kind of imagery that says from here to here, from here to here, from here to here, if you're going to develop.
We definitely have landscape standards, and we have
Right.
tree requirements, and we've increased the size requirement for trees adjacent to streets. And we emphasize the need to develop a canopy. And one of the problems that we were experiencing was where commercial property owners were improperly pruning their trees so that they could maintain visibility of their signs. And so we reduced the maximum permitted height of signs to 15 feet. And we've required landscapers to register with the Village of Pinecrest. They are required to become familiar with our pruning standards. We have a very robust code enforcement department. So I think in terms of trees and canopy, we continue to work on development of canopy along US 1, and I think we've made a lot of headway. Not that we shouldn't review those landscape standards now in this process.
And it's a question to you all. When you've done these things before, do you show the graphics of what you're trying to accomplish, or is it just the standards and the calipers and the trees and the technical?
I think what you're suggesting is that we have some diagrams that illustrate what we're requiring and asking for, and I think that would be helpful. Because we don't right now.
Yeah, and what's kind of funny is that Pinecrest, the Coral Gables is very linear. The street trees are linear. I mean, I voluntarily did a house at the end of my street. I put the trees in on their swale on the side. I made sure to stagger the trees. I changed so it's going to look like a natural growth, but it's still, the spacing's proper and everything, everything else is proper. But I think, we have a different feel than Miami Beach and Coral Gables.
Yeah.
So if anything, things should be, and the hardest thing to quantify is natural. I know that because I every day have to explain it or show it and demonstrate it. But natural is a little bit more, so of a stagger,
Yes.
not a linear, a little bit more kind of, because that's what our native,
Correct.
that's what's around us. And I think we have a problem with our streetscape because we allow the homeowners to dictate, put in their own trees, and a streetscape should be in context with the whole street. And we allow like a homeowner to put their 5 different trees, and then the next neighbor puts a different tree, and it's very helter-skelter. So I think that, I think our streetscape needs to kind of say, okay, down Killian, these are the trees, and down these streets, or you have to incorporate what the neighbor has. I did 82nd Avenue as the street plan, and if there was a gumbo or on one side, I put it on the other side, so that there's a little rhythm. So I went by what was there wherever I could.
So maybe encourage more of a natural pattern.
Could the language, and just based on what you just said now, could it be based on a specific ecology, a hammock ecology, or
I'm not sure how that would be. I mean,
because you just said gumbo limbo.
Right.
And I'm thinking, well, gumbo limbo bang.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you have like your mahoganies, your oaks, your gumbo limbos. Those are like your native big canopy trees. But I guess staggering instead of like a linear. But you have to have a little more space to create a true stagger.
Right.
A linear is more cost effective space wise.
One more slide. Okay.
So, right.
Number 6.
Yeah, there's one more. Yeah, so this is the last one, because we kind of into the others. This is in terms of the brand. So there was another thing that Ronnie Mata had suggested, which was he wanted to buffer the parking lot so that they couldn't be seen. So he was suggesting a 8 to 10 foot setback. I think that was on a different slide. I'm sorry, an 8 to 10 foot buffer zone, a 20-foot setback of the parking, surface parking, and structured parking, so that you couldn't perceive or see the parking from Pinecrest Parkway. And he said he would draw a diagram. But essentially what he's saying is have a bigger setback, have a little bit of a wider buffer zone than you have now, 10 feet instead of 8. And then you're sort of,
But no, it's 30 feet instead of 8, if you're doing 10 plus 20.
a 10-foot landscape buffer.
Well, what's a 20-foot setback? That's for building?
The setback, I think,
Well, I'm
you
asking,
have to ask Steve, but I know that there's a buffer strip and then there's a setback, and I don't believe.
There's an 8-foot landscape strip requirement right now, so there has to be a minimum of 8 feet of green space between Pinecrest Parkway right away and, I mean, from their property line to the parking lot or building. Has to be a minimum 8 feet of landscape green space along US 1.
I mean, I think, and I said this, I rode a bike from one end to the other, trying to sort of thing out, but getting the sidewalk off of the parkway would be
Yeah.
a huge thing, because right now, it's deadly. I mean, I took my bike all the way from 136 up to Dayland, and I couldn't actually do that. I had to do some back
Well,
roads to get there, but it was friggin' dangerous.
Yeah.
I think a real good place where that could happen and almost in an
It was,
experimental
I mean, you
way
wouldn't do
would
it.
be
You
Wayside
would never
Park.
take your family on it.
You
I
ta-
didn't like it.
So I think the only way to do that, since there's no more right-of-way available in the public right-of-way, and I don't think anybody's suggesting that they take more right-of-way, you'd have to require the
Either flip
property
them,
owner
either
to
flip
develop it
them,
within an
either flip them,
easement.
put the sidewalk in and the landscape out, that's what I'm suggesting.
Well, like at Wayside Park, the city owns the park. So if you were to, move the sidewalk in and then put like green island or shrubs along US 1 and then do a little nice curved walk, sidewalk along Wayside Park, because it's just not, you don't feel safe walking.
No, I mean,
What
you're not
is
safe.
recommended, I think, is a good idea. I mean, is it possible, Melissa, and committee members too, instead of having a sidewalk along US 1, have the landscaping along
Just
US
flip
1 and
them.
require the
Just flip
private
them.
property owner to put the sidewalk on his or her property?
Yeah, I
Well, that
think
could
you
be
have,
part of the incentive process, right? You make that an incentive.
Yeah.
There's
I thi- I thi- I think it-
ramifications to that, so you have to have.
I mean, that would go a long way to sort of helping on the identity of the landscape of the thing, because you could do things like flowering bushes, you could do things, you could get a vocabulary.
And-
Besides the median, you get a vocabulary on the side that,
And-
I mean,
and-
you know when you get in Coral Gables, I mean, yeah, royal palms and their bushes are overdone, but they've been there for 30 years and you know it when you drive through. So what is our identity and how do you do that? If you could get that, that sidewalk is useless on the side.
Well, I mean, even
So
the,
you could build a sidewalk, and you could require the sidewalk to be built on the private property. We've done that before. It's an additional setback, but there's some legal implications, and you want to have some kind of easement agreement because there's a liability
Oh, no,
associated with that.
I understand, I'm just saying we have sidewalk and green space, can't we do green space and sidewalk?
Required to do that at a property that we, and it caused an 8-month delay on the project because the covenant.
It's nothing for Miami.
Just that, not all the rest of it. Once we were near the end, we couldn't get past the legal part of that covenant. I think it's a great idea to have more green space on the sides of the thoroughfare and the landscape and the tree. I think that's terrific. I think it's just a little troubling for me, and I'm just going to say it from the standpoint of an architect to say, well, that parking garage, it just shouldn't have facade because let's just cover it up because it's an eyesore. I think that there's enough competitions now about creating great pieces of architecture. There are parking garages that actually designers are competing for parking garages because you could do some really great, interesting things. No one just ever thought of it. And then when you have someone do a great thing, wouldn't that be horrible if you had to put landscape in front of it? So I think you can't dictate that either from a designer. A designer could come up with some terrific structures that we may not want to limit.
well,
I will agree with John that I think that the green and
even just low, just 2 feet of the green island, at least if a car is traveling 50 miles an hour, it drives through the green island, it's gonna slow it down.
Look, even
To like
even if
25.
you do it in stages and you say, okay, whatever, new development, new thing, incentive, whatever. But right now, sidewalks here on the road, and the green space is required there. All they're saying is do it the
Yeah,
other way around. And if-
you could put the green island.
And if that were happening, whatever this is, whether it's a 15-foot or 12-foot zone or whatever it is, I mean,
It's tough to go through the process.
Because nobody's gonna cross US one in the middle
yeah,
of the
I
anyway.
mean, because this is brutal. I mean,
It's
the cars are here,
brutal.
right?
I've ridden my bike on that.
That's
road,
brutal.
and it's horrible. And I hate the
that
roads,
is
and I hate the
protecting
cars,
the face of the cars in the parking lot, right? I just soon ride my
lived here
bike
all my
up against the
life. I've never
cars.
walked along
These
US
that are
one.
parked, that he's moving at 60 miles an hour.
And I've done it with my wife 2 or 3 times, thinking, yeah, we'll do the exercise.
But I think we have to
And the experience is horrible. So I tend to agree, it would be nicer to flip it, if we could flip it. But I think that we're gonna run into a lot of conflict telling people to do the sidewalk on their side.
Like a good place to start it for fun would be Wayside Park. The city owns the park, get rid of that, move a nice, do a
would be nice. I like that.
a nice sidewalk further in off of US one and get rid of the sidewalk that runs over US one. And then see
Meandering sidewalk.
Yeah,
a nice meandering,
That would be
kind of
wonderful.
wide,
Yeah,
just,
and
and get it off of US one.
and by example, the city would be leading the charge on that. And I think that there's one thing that I wanted to add. Look, we're talking about all these things, and I know that there's a desire to implement things in a certain time frame. But, there may be an opportunity to sort of test some of these ideas once we have a set of rules, okay, to create like a charrette and allow people to with prizes and everything, competition, to allow people to take our made-up rules and test them to see if they actually work.
Well,
Well, that's what we're doing now, John.
I know you're doing it, but I think that.
Well, would it be weird, I know Coral Gables has the Coral Gables pink, but I know that development off of Giralda, they have the yellow. Would it be weird for us to have Pinecrest yellow, that that those are
I
main
think
arteries?
Pinecrest color is green.
I know, but the green looks like algae. I don't know about that green,
Yeah, I mean,
but
it's.
if you could do the yellow, and the yellow shows up better in the evening,
Right.
at night, when
You're
people
talking
want
about
to
a
walk.
sidewalk
As a sidewalk, we do
A
like a
sidewalk,
Pinecrest yellow.
of Pinecrest, you're talking about a colored sidewalk. to
Right,
make
like
it
in front of
attractive.
Wayside Park, we do a nice little curve, you connect it at the corners to cross the street, but then you bring it in and you give it a nice curve, maybe throw a couple of benches in there.
Yeah.
And then do Green Island, do
In
the
terms of
ground
what
cover
that color
between.
would be, I would think that the community would have some input, sure. But the whole theme is a colored sidewalk. to
Yeah, just so
differentiate, I
you
think
know
it
that
makes
those are
sense.
main arteries, or
Yeah.
those are main connections.
I think that's a
It
good
sort of
idea.
cues you in.
We don't have to decide on a color tonight, but I think that's not.
Great. So
The green is like the algae.
Yeah, the green is a
No, it
little
won't be a green
sketchy.
sidewalk, I was thinking.
But the yellow in front of that development, right there where it has the Grazianos, right there, they have the yellow, and the yellow holds up well, it still looks pretty good.
Can you send me a copy?
I'm voting on the next slide. I started this morning in Amsterdam. I started this morning in Amsterdam, so I'm at like 2 o'clock my night, European time clock.
we're gonna wrap it up, but let me just say a couple more things.
I got in at
So
4:30.
the dimensions that we had come up with, and this was from our designer. 20-foot setback, 8-foot landscape zone, which we're saying could be 10, and then a 10-foot multi-use path. So it's kind of what you're suggesting, John.
Yeah.
I just wanted to get input on the sign standards and then also the gateways or the monument signs, because one of the suggestions, I think it was also from
I think we
Rob.
have a new monument now that's kind of going in around the town.
Okay, so he was, at all your east-west streets put something, and I don't know what you all think of that. Requirement of 25% for every site regardless of the use. And then, if you want some of these things, would you give bonuses? So for example, we had an image that people liked, which was as you're driving down the corridor, and I'm sorry I didn't put it in here, you have on the corner a big open space park. So that as you're driving up US 1, you have like a sort of opening of green space. You know, is that something that we want to try and look at so that you're creating something that's specific to Pinecrest, so that you know when you're driving through that you're in a special place?
Can we,
So, I'm sorry.
no, I was gonna say, you know, we control the whole median
Right.
from Kendall all the way over. Can we create like a really cool obelisk that on certain streets? It says Killian, Howard Drive, you know, like maybe that, and then maybe that, because that's the one place where most of the public drives along. If we do want to have like an image or a certain, you know, look, that might be something that could be cohesive through the city.
Yeah.
And with that idea,
Maybe a forest down or something?
which would should.
No, I don't know, like an obelisk on a little pedestal at each of the intersections.
Would that, with the percentage of construction, all right, and on the larger parcels where there are sort of primary points of arrival and so forth, couldn't there be the incentive or the bonus, or whatever we want to call it, that is 5% of the budget, or 2%, I don't know what percent, 2% of public art, and the 2% has to be part of the design, and so they have to bring an artist to do, which is something that some of these cities are doing, where that's why you have sculptures all over the place, right? Because if the project is a $100 million project, 2% could be a pretty nice piece of obelisk. Or, you know.
Right. I know they're doing that in the city of Miami. I don't know how successful that program was. Do you know anything about it?
I'll tell you that the city of Miami has put in a lot of art,
Yeah.
and people, and the artists benefit from it, which, you know, they got clobbered with COVID and all that stuff. But you think about Coral Gables that does it, City of Miami Beach does it, and the City of Miami. So it's, I think that's something that if we don't have it, it leads to the whole obelisk idea. You know, hey, there's some conditions here with your money.
Yeah.
You know, you got to put some artwork in there.
Let me ask Melissa a question. You say in your slide, recess parking 20 feet. Is that to excavate down 20 feet and have it recessed?
No, that was the terminology that Ronnie used.
What's that?
Recess, but wait, I think
Because
I
one
wanted to
thing
go
I-
in on this public art. Though.
Well, it's not so much the public art, but more about the announcement of you're coming and you're going. I think Ronnie had a good idea. I mean, I love the fact that, you know, somebody puts back some pine trees and some saw palmetto and stuff like that, because that's what all that was here, right? Even when I moved in my lot 40 years ago, it was nothing but pine trees and saw palmetto.
But for some strange reason, they're not growing very well.
Well,
They have to be planted properly.
yeah, I mean, but they can. We're in the right environment for
No,
them for them
I
to work.
love it.
But I'm only saying that it'd be really. I can't see taking it through the whole of Pinecrest, because there's a lot of mature green canopy trees that are out there that I would hate to take out to replace with, you know, with pine, right? But I think if you could make a statement at the beginning and at the end with whatever this monument thing is, and you saw that, because they're gonna, you know, when they grow, they get a bit tall, so they have their own presence, and the saw palmetto is really quite what went with it, right? I mean, that's what grew, that was what was everywhere here. But if you had a sign with that, and you took some dimension and something, and you had it happen at our entry and down there, and maybe it occurs at some of these midpoints, or if you find another place for signage, it happens in those. So you could have these sort of nodes of Pinecrest in the median that were significant enough in their planting and in their breadth and width and number of trees that it made a little bit of a statement. And I know there's been a few examples of it done, and we're working on it, but if you really made that effort at the beginning and the end with something, whether obelisk sign, whatever makes that announcement, but the vegetation would really be the storyteller. The sign would just be an announcement.
I think we need to emphasize the need for more pine trees. We had a bringing pines back to Pinecrest initiative, And it was somewhat successful, but I think we can count.
Yeah, it would be, yeah, I had a neighbor who did it, and I was so surprised to see how quick, I mean, she did it on her own,
Right.
and she really did a lot of it. Now, I mean, they were my neighbors 20 years ago, but now it looks like, nearly like it did before they came down.
And then I just had a question though, where it says recessed parking 20 feet. One thing that I had been encouraging and think should be included in the plan is if you're going to have surface parking along US 1, to have a berm, like an undulating berm that is elevated, and have the parking behind that. That will help to buffer the view. You know,
So the
it's
only-
really
yeah.
nicely done. Where it's been done, it's very successful.
The only thing I don't like about berms is that they reduce visibility for people walking behind them. So for me, it's a little bit of a safety concern.
I see.
Yeah, but it provides safety from the friggin' cars.
Right.
So-
But as a.
But on the other side is all this
as a-
commercial space.
Well, the only thing with the berm can be a ramp too. If somebody's going 60, 70 miles an hour, they
I think it's-
they can go a little further.
It's been.
But I
it's
think
very
the
attractive
Green
where it's been
Island,
done.
the
I
Green
like it.
Island that grows with nothing, no water, no irrigation, a car driving through that will slow them down because it'll
Right.
like the friction it'll eventually
Well,
stop.
I think we're.
Steve needs to wrap up. I think Steve has a few comments on the calendar here and the schedule.
Yeah, definitely.
Are we gonna be able to speak to the public? No?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
So with regard to the calendar, the village council has scheduled a joint meeting. The Pinecrest Parkway Citizens Committee and the village council has been scheduled for 9 o'clock, from 9 o'clock in the morning on September 21st. So today is the 15th. Thursday, it would be next Wednesday. They have asked the Pinecrest Parkway Citizens Committee meet with them in a joint workshop meeting on Wednesday, September 21st from 9 to noon. And the purpose is to discuss the committee's observations and initial plan recommendations with the village council, and to get input from the village council at this point in time. It's a workshop meeting. And then on the 22nd, the day after, to present your recommendations more formally. And that would be at a regular council meeting at 6 o'clock. And then I have scheduled here for the 27th, another meeting of the committee from 5:30 to 8 in this room to dissect the village council's input and to finalize your recommendations, to review the draft, a more advanced, more complete draft plan, to provide final input, to review final recommendations, and to basically endorse a draft plan.
We don't have to have another meeting because we didn't have quorum between the 15th and the 21st.
No.
There is no meeting between the 15th and the 21st scheduled unless you're,
No, I'm just because we
We're not voting on anything.
We have one more meeting with you, and it's our intention to have a really good draft of the plan, because we don't have a lot of time to do it, but you can see a lot of the ideas are in here. And to get your sort of recommendation, and then it would be given to the council.
it's really important that you guys, I know you've done a lot of good work, and the consultants have done a lot of good work, and we've got the survey complete. So the village council, again, is going to have this joint meeting at 9 o'clock on September 21st, next Wednesday. And then they're going to meet at 6 o'clock on the 22nd. That's their regular meeting, and I think it would be helpful if at least the chairman could be at that meeting, if not all the members. And then this committee will meet again on the 27th, September 27th, from 5:30 to 8 in this room. And that would be your last meeting, because your term the term that you were appointed for ends at the end of September.
We're retired.
I think you should move quickly to public comment, just the fact that we have a few people who sat through the entire presentation.
So, does everybody,
Go ahead.
I think I can make these meetings.
I know I can't make the 27th.
What's that?
I know I told before I can't make the 27th.
Not the 27th, okay.
It's-
Well, hopefully the others can.
This should be the, yeah, there you go. There you go. I'm John Steinbauer, 9500 Southwest 73rd Avenue. I've been listening. I think you've come up with some reasonable thoughts. I do think that you need to look, you've all been talking about Coral Gables and Miami Beach. Coral Gables is not Pinecrest. Coral Gables has a downtown. This city does not have a downtown. So where do the people of Pinecrest primarily shop and go to cafes and whatever? Guess what? Along South Dixie Highway on the west side. Occasionally the east side, occasionally they fight Dadeland, but this strip is a commercial strip. It is Pinecrest downtown, really, other than maybe Parkhouse Gardens. But this is downtown, and y'all want to kind of think about that. And again, I know that's your plan. You guys are gonna come up and suggest something to the city and the council. But keep in mind when we're talking about having residential and a little bit of commercial that is in high residential buildings is not the same as what we have here. I'm not saying that the strip centers and all that are kind of old and fashioned and like that, but people are using them, correct? Now, why don't I happen to be in real estate, commercial, industrial real estate since 1974, and I've lived in this community since 1973, okay? The problem is, and I hate to say this, but you all tonight have been looking at the developer, not the people who live in Pinecrest. Why do we need to have incentives other than being forced by a downtown? Why do we need incentives to force a guy like me who has developed and does developing? Why do I need an incentive to come in here and build something that is now under our code? If I want to make money and the guy who wants to sell wants to make money, I can use that code. Dayland Plaza, I live right behind it. Not behind it, next to it, okay? And and I probably won't live there for a long time, obviously. But to put a 4-story building behind my house, it's not right. So, and with having a residential community, and believe me, the commercial is not fun to live behind, but even worse would be a residential with a bunch of people out there having parties on their balconies and people. And also there's another thing. You brought it up, safety. Every one of these things that you have, putting more trees, letting people have access to the thing right across from the station. Hello, we've got a wall, 8-foot wall all the way across. And I can tell you, if they put a pedestrian bridge there, the people coming off of Metro Rail, not all of them are very safe people. So, and again, what I'm trying to tell you right now is some thoughts when you get into the furtherance of your meetings, okay? I'm not criticizing, I'm just trying to suggest some things to take in consideration. As far as having a 4-story limit, whatever the height is, and you do have to think about equipment that goes on top of the building. What is wrong with having a community vision from Pinecrest, as if we really care, but the people driving back and forth. But if we want to have a look to it, why not have a 4-story limitation? It gives character to the community. And it isn't Coral Gables that is building, they didn't do this because of the metro rail, they just went ahead and had a lot of 8-story, 10-story, 20-story buildings, even on our side of the highway. So what I'm saying is, when you're considering this, consider the people in Pinecrest. We know what they feel, a lot of them anyway. You know, you've heard the committees that are not very happy with what's going on there. So if you will take that into consideration, I think that would be good. Primarily what this appears to us, who are residents, is that we are trying to feed the metro rail rather than provide something good for our community. And I think you need to really take into consideration the people in Pinecrest. It should be not for developers, it should be for the people in Pinecrest. And we know they're not totally happy with us. So, I think to finalize, I really think we need to, again, take into consideration, your committee needs to take into consideration what is good for Pinecrest. And I know you have to supposedly, in 2 years, have something that our great committee downtown wants. But I can tell you, I have a very personal friend who just was elected to that committee, you know? So I think you can do something. The thing that bothers me most about tonight, I was told that this was going to be about 136th and 104th Street. And all of a sudden, Dayland Plaza has been discussed and like that. And I was going to ask, how do you delineate our 3 parcels from those 2 parcels in the code? I'm not sure you can do it. And finally, 104th and 136th Street. What is the county going to do to feed the metro bus or whatever it is? They're not doing their job. I mean, now we do have a couple buildings, but some of them are so far away, people aren't going to walk back and forth to the metro rail. So we need to look at what is good for Pinecrest and not what is good for Miami-Dade County. And that's all I have. Anyway, thank you. Thanks.
Well, Skip Peter, 7,000 Southwest 103rd Street. I just want to thank you all for your time, you know, and the study you've put into this, because my mind was really open today. And what I see y'all doing is not, I didn't hear anything about tall buildings from this committee. I didn't hear anything about, you know, giant structures. I heard a committee that was dedicated to working with Pinecrest and doing what's in Pinecrest's interest. Everyone on this committee is a Pinecrest resident, for God's sakes, and they're volunteering for this. So I thought the idea is that you, and the 2 of y'all, Doug and John, sometimes disagreed, but I thought you were very harmonious together as well. And you had really just ideas that I think your concept as to how do we make Pinecrest US 1 more vibrant and more interesting for us, the residents. And I heard a great quote one time, I think it was Tennessee Williams, who said, there are 3 places in the United States. There's San Francisco, there's New Orleans, and every other place is Cleveland. Right now, what we have on US 1 is sort of a Cleveland. You know, you got these giant parking lots and this retail stuff, and you know, when the store closed down next to Best Buy, what came in? And that's H.H. Gregg. I'm like, well, that's not really interesting. We have a Best Buy and an H.H. Gregg. But the idea that y'all are coming up with green space, right? And just kind of rethinking how things flow together and modernizing things without creating high density. I'm not hearing anything about, you know, giant buildings, nothing like that. And those have been the scare tactics, of course, that we've heard. But I thank you, because you know, you all seem to have Pinecrest interests in mind, and you're coming up with very interesting concepts. I can't wait to see the final product. So thank you very much.
Let me add that as I've experienced our gatherings, and as designers, we can disagree with an interest in good design. I don't mind discussing or debating or just agreeing with the best idea in this sort of journey we're going through in regards to the city, because I think that it's very difficult to do what you all are doing and trying to visualize a plan that's going to grow over time into something. This is not all going to suddenly happen and busload of people are going to arrive in front of our doorstep and we're going to have tons and tons of people. A city grows over the course of 50 years, 100 years. And so it's the evolution that is hard to predict. But if the guidelines are generally there and they're reasonable and they're fair, then you want people to be attracted to buying property. All of us want to sell our houses for the going rate now, not 10 years ago or 20 years ago or 40 years ago. We're liking how the value of the land's gone up because we live in Pinecrest. So we want to just continue to take advantage of the benefit and the resources we have. So you know, the fact that we don't always agree on certain things doesn't mean we're not going to get to the end together, right? We all live here too. We want to see it, you know, not look like parts of Cleveland. You know, I think that there are parts that are very nice. And I think that as we're talking about it, and John, you're talking about it, I'm thinking, yeah, you know what? That long leaf pine, boy, that used to be pretty special in groves. But when you see one of them or two of them just standing out by themselves, it's really sort of disappointing because you know what it used to look like. And the saw palmetto, yeah, let's talk about it from a hammock or a long leaf pine ecology. What are all those trees that make up that ecology? So that to me is really sort of fascinating, bringing that spirit into it. If we're going to do it, let's complete the journey and really consider it as beautiful, because now it's almost extinct.
Look, one of my favorite restaurants is Pizza Brooklyn. Right? It's right there on, I guess that's what, Daytran Drive, and when in US 1.
Right from his house.
Huh? Okay, yeah. I go to Pizza Brooklyn all the time, right? But I don't want to sit on the sidewalk where their outdoor seats are because I don't want to sit in front of a bunch of cars, right? That's not interesting. I'd rather go inside. I want to eat in an outdoor cafe, but that's not really an outdoor cafe. And no one uses the upstairs parking there, even though it's available, right? The parking lot's always packed. But I always thought, you know, I look at that place and I think, gee, what if there was a parking garage on one side that might be 4 stories high? A pretty parking garage. I've seen the pretty parking garage you're talking about. I think there's one in Wynwood. I've seen other ones in other cities across the country. But yeah, so you put all the cars in one parking garage, and suddenly you make a greenscape, nice area with meandering sidewalks and plants and outdoor cafes, and you create that kind of incentive, you know, that'd be interesting.
And I think that's what we all.
Yeah,
we all.
Yeah, I would like to just stay here in Pinecrest and not go to Corvette.
But thank you all very much, and Doug here, he was in Amsterdam this morning. Talk about dedication.
Oh my God, that's a real dedication.
7:30 in my hood, so.
I would
I'm
love
getting an
that.
Uber.
Thank you. We're wrapping up. Thank
So
you.
it's this plus 6. It's almost, it's 2:30 in the morning.
I appreciated all of the discussion, and the main reason I'm here is I was born at Doctors Hospital in 1953 and came home to my house on Mitchell Manor Circle. My name is Robert Mitchell, and I think I've seen things that none of you have seen that far back, and I enjoy the different things that people knew about. Either they heard about it or a little bit, and I'm a professional landscape architect. I went to the University of Florida and at the College of Architecture and Landscape Architecture. From there, I did well there, and I went to Harvard Graduate School of Design, and that was a more planning and urban design. Then anyway, I got married to a person from Sarasota, part of Florida, and moved to Boulder, Colorado, and did the Pearl Street Mall, and you know, anyway, I ended up doing projects in California, throughout the United States, and now I'm back living in the house where I was born and came home. Probably going to be moving in a couple of years. But anyway, I'm going to follow it. I have some ideas, even as far as the, in fact, the house right across the street from mine, the elevation is 20. You know, and I've been through all the different hurricanes, you know, through the years, and basically, the right behind my house was it was the longleaf pine and salt palmettos, and the gopher tortoises that shared with the rattlesnakes, you know, and I would go out there barefooted, you know. So anyway, I have some ideas too, even as far as the limestone, and then after it gets a little bit black, I think that could possibly be one of the things as far as the different roads. Anyway, I appreciated everything, and that's why I'm here. Thank you.
Let me get the sign sheet through this.
We are unique, we are, we have the food.
Get this one jumping.
Not,
I
Miami
agree.
Beach doesn't have,
I
I
agree.
mean, you could say, okay, you need to incorporate it
And I want
somewhat.
to
I
get
just
this
don't want
shown.
it, I don't want the recreation of all games with all the keystone. But I did, the best thing you said is that you're a Gator, because so am
Did you
I.
sign?
So,
I'm a Gator too.
So there you go, that's why we get along. So I went to Florida and so forth. But I think that we've been doing this now for like 4 or 5
Are we
times.
gonna adjourn the
And we,
meeting?
2-3 hours and stuff like
Tape.
this,
I
talking about
We gotta turn the
it.
tape
And the
off.
objective is to kind of
Mr.
reach
Medina,
out into the distance and see
Yeah.
where we go with this, right?
Right.
you're
Do you
gonna
want to
adjourn?
adjourn the meeting,
meeting.
otherwise
Let's
your
adjourn the meeting.
conversation
Not that
will
it's
be
an official
videotaped.
meeting.
Official meeting, we have adjourned.
Here's a little
No
thing.
second.
You know Sunnyland Shopping Center?